Hello, and welcome to another episode of Misadventures in my quest for gainful employment. I will be doing something a little bit different today. We will be joined by a guest speaker, Brock Munch. He is a friend of mine. We went to the same school together. He dated my sister for 5 years. I can always edit that out if he'd prefer.
That's fine.
Okay.
That's an important detail, I think.
Yeah, because we really grew up and spent a lot of time together. We're in each other's lives.
Yes.
So I'm going to kind of introduce the episode, but Brock, if you would like to just say hello to our listeners, feel free.
Hello, everyone.
Yes. So
loving it so far.
Yeah. So I'm going to kind of start and let you guys know that today's topic was kind of inspired by Brock. Kind of had the idea for this podcast, and I was like, it's a great idea. I want to do it. I think it's important, but I just want to give our listeners kind of a heads up that it's a little bit heavier than what we've been doing in our previous two episodes. This one kind of deals a little bit with trauma around some of these early work experiences. Would you say that's accurate, Brock?
I would say at least trauma adjacent. Yes, definitely trauma, childhood trauma, but it's fairly innocuous in nature.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of dive right in and give a little bit of a backstory, and we're going to kind of let Brock tell his story. So this is part of the history of my town. I grew up in a small town in Iowa called State Center. And when I was in kindergarten, I had a little crush on a little boy, and his name was Tyler Hibbs. And I remember to me, he was just like a dream because I was half day, but he was full day. So I thought like, oh, he's so advanced. He's full day. And I remember he was from a farming community, and part of our curriculum in kindergarten was every day we talk about the weather, and we talk about the high for the day, the low for the day. And because he was from a farm, he always knew the weather. And I remember being like, oh my gosh, this boy, he's like, I remember the teacher said something like, what's the high today? And he was like 55. And I was like, oh, Tyler. Oh my goodness. And on Valentine's Day, I remember I got in the milk, and I also remember he was so masculine to me because when it would be milk time, I would always pick the pink milk, but Tyler would pick the blue milk. I'm like, oh, he's such a true boy. You know, he has the blue milk. And
wow.
I know, I was just gaga for this.
Think about how gendered the
milk was
in school, but now you mention it. Wow.
So, and on Valentine's Day, for whatever reason, I was just bursting with excitement because it was Valentine's Day and he was standing next to me in the milk line. And I just went up to him and I said, kiss me. And then he did, right in the milk line. And I just couldn't believe it. I was just so excited. I was on fire. And then I remember after that first kiss on Valentine's Day, he started meeting me in the coat room, and he would help me hang up my backpack in my cubby. And after our initial kiss between Valentine's Day and when school ended, he kissed me 7 more times. And I say the word kiss loosely. Like, I think once he licked my cheek in the coat room, but I remember I held with such pride that Tyler Hibbs kissed me 8 times. And, you know, it was my first kind of crush. And then, so Tyler, the summer between kindergarten and first grade, this is kind of how I remember it. I remember my dad, I'm just going to say what happened. He was riding a Ryder lawnmower. So I'm pretty sure he was 7 years old, and he rode it in a ditch. And this is my understanding of the story. And it crushed him, something hit his lung, punctured his lung, and he suffocated and was crushed to death under a Ryder lawnmower. And I remember my dad, I was petting my cat, and I remember my dad came in and explained to me that Tyler had died. And I remember he asked me if I wanted to go to the visitation and that he would take me. And everybody knew, my family knew we were an item. And I remember just internalizing the fact that the boy I loved had died. And the way I expressed it was I just pet my cat so hard. When my dad was done talking to me, I had a handful of fur. I was sweating and petting my cat. And I remember I said, no, I don't want to go to the visitation. and this is kind of an aside, but it does reflect the trauma. I thought because I was like a child and my world was so egocentric, I thought maybe he died because we kissed.
Oh yeah.
And
Always guilt.
I didn't kiss another boy until I was 19 years old. And I like wondered why, like, I didn't go through the normal dating processes that like everyone else did in middle school and high school. And I had this like fundamentally internalized belief that any boy I love, if I kiss him, he will die. I'm laughing nervously, not because it's funny.
No, oh man. Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, that like childhood egocentric, like everything's my fault.
Yeah. Well, that guilt too, it stays with you. Like like I was telling you on the phone earlier, the guilt, I only just recently realized all of the guilt because there was all this other stuff on the surface that I was dealing with for years. So that's pretty normal, I think, with trauma.
Yeah. And I remember like obviously his parents were devastated and it was a terrible tragedy. But I remember like people are like, yeah, but it wasn't really his parents' fault because like in our community, kids work, kids do mow their lawns when they're 7 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And it was normal. And so, Brock, do you want to kind of share a little bit about like how that affected you and also share your story about your train incident?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good lead in because I want to just emphasize the point that the community we grew up in, even though we were living inside of town, was still a very agrarian community, and everything about our community revolved around agriculture. And even to this day, people are still having injuries, or people are a normal casualty commonly to just the agrarian way of life. We should preface this by saying, I think, wouldn't you think?
Wouldn't I think that?
Wouldn't you think that would be a fair?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and I was a year younger than Tyler Hibbs, so I remember this vividly when it happened. And I think, within about a year or two after that happened, I started working as like a 7 or 8 year old. My dad mowed and took care of the grounds at the local public library. And so I would work with him under his supervision most of the time, I should say. And I started working for like $8 an hour at the public library. So it was
that was good money.
Totally. For an 8-year-old, I mean, I think that his experience, because that was my job, was riding lawnmower, and I was on the side of hills all the time. And I was feeling like, from time to time, it was like, oh my gosh, it's going to roll over on me and crush me like Tyler Hibbs. Because that's really, I think, ultimately what happened to him. He was in the ditch mowing on a really steep slope. And I mean, when you're a 7 or 8-year-old child, you weigh maybe 70 pounds soaking wet. I don't know.
Uh-huh.
And a 200-pound, 300-pound mower would crush you to death for sure. But around that same time, and this is sort of adjacent to work, but I was dealing with trauma related to death in my own sort of way. And it's sort of a story I've told a lot, but I'm willing to share with your listeners.
Yeah,
because
I would love for you to share it, what you're comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, why I like sharing this story is because it's my trauma, but it's also trauma that's something totally related to my own accidental decision or intentional decision to try to cross the railroad tracks at the wrong time. So but basically it's important to note that we lived in a small town where there were trains that went through frequently, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Probably every 5 minutes or so, and they were not going slow by any means.
Nope.
A lot of times just speeding through town. And there's two sets of railroad tracks there. So they go in both directions.
Yes.
An important factor here.
Mm-hmm.
Both directions simultaneously. And so when I was 8 years old, this was like right at the beginning of third grade for me. I think it was in October or something like that. It was a very warm, nice day out. And I was going actually to ride my bike across town. I know that you like
That's
biking.
what we all did.
Yeah, we biked all over our town, like, small children biked all over. It was fairly normal.
I
It's not
know.
like that in every community I know. We were fairly privileged in that way, but that's just the way it was in our community. And so I needed to ride my bike across town to talk to my dad to get permission because I wanted to go hang out with a friend after school. So I start riding my bike across town, and I reach the railroad tracks to arrive or to try to meet my dad.
Mm-hmm.
On the way there, there's a train at the railroad tracks. I'm by the Sissy's convenience store in State Center, Iowa. If your listeners know the area.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But there was a train. I was waiting. There was a lot of cars because it was like 3 p.m. So on either side of the railroad tracks, there were several cars waiting for the train. And it was going pretty quickly, and it went by, and the cross arms were still down, but a motorcycle across the intersection chose to go around the cross arms and speed away. And I thought, well, it's probably safe to go. So I started to pedal my bike. I'm on the sidewalk, by the way, and the rail bed is sort of like a little hill or a mound. You kind of remember that. And so, as you know, when you're first starting to ride your bike or pedal, especially if you're going uphill, it's very slow going. It's about a slow walking pace, if that,
Yeah.
So I get right about into the middle of the train tracks, and from the other side, because this is one train was going the other direction, it had just ended, but from the back side of it, on the other side of it, another train was coming in the same direction or in the opposite direction. So it was speeding toward me at the intersection, and immediately my fight or flight senses kick in or freeze, which is actually what I did initially. It's kind of my response, I guess. I've realized over the years that I freeze initially. But then I realized I was going to die, obviously, because I was in the middle of the train tracks and there's a huge train speeding toward me, and I had about a few seconds to get out of the way. And so I started to step backward and pedal backward. I step off of the back of the bike, and I'm just as letting go of the bike. Just as I'm letting go of the bike, the front of the train hits the front wheel of my bicycle.
Oh my word.
This is a nice, huffy bicycle with the pads on the handlebars and all that. Goes flying down the railroad tracks in front of me, down the way, maybe like 60 to 100 feet. Just totally destroyed the bike. But I somehow was unharmed. I let go of the bike in time and stepped backward just enough that the train did not hit me. And I did not also get sucked into the train, because that also apparently happens to people sometimes when they get a little too close. Or that's what they tell us in school, because we grew up in a community by the railroad tracks, right? We had the Union Pacific would come to our school and talk about the railroads. And
I mean, that's what I heard why we got the name State Centers, because we're like in the center of the railroad lines. Two came together, and
it's exactly why. It's not geographically the center. Zering or something is actually, which is not far away. But anyway, It's State Center because it's right there on the railroad tracks. It's a main Union Pacific artery, and there were other accidents right in that time vicinity too, but it did not turn out very well. I know that not long after my accident, a couple on a 3-wheel ATV tried to outrun a train and did not successfully do so.
Oh, wow.
And were both killed by the train in that exact intersection. And for weeks after that, there were little circles painted all over the railroad tracks. So while I was physically unharmed by the train did slam on its brakes, and the conductor, or the train operator, I should say, I don't know what they're officially called, but he ran all the way back to town because, as you might know, it takes a train
like a mile.
Yeah, traveling at full speed to stop, even at a dead stop when the wheels are screeching and there's the smell of iron in the air. It's one of the flavors that I remember from the incident, because all up in my face when it happened. He was slamming on the brakes probably when he hit the bike, I would imagine, already reacting. But it takes a train a long time to stop. And so I'm sure that seeing the bike fly out in front of the train from the train operator's perspective, surely he thought he hit me. I remember him running back and just feeling really panicked, and then realizing that I was fully intact. And I bet he was grateful for that. But I'm sure that that whole time, from the time that he slammed on the brakes to the time he arrived back, was an experience for that person as well. I think this whole thing, I realized later in life that, I had post-traumatic stress disorder in relation to this. It caused some panic attacks when I was a young child, and caused me to think morbidly about death and life for a long time after that, and have panic attacks frequently. And so this is adjacent to the time where I started working, and to the time of Tyler Hibbs's story. Constantly terrified me. I thought about death a lot. And I realized when I was older, I think I was an adult by the time I realized this, but I didn't even know what to call what was going on with me. And, as a child, you don't really have the vocabulary to name really complex emotions or feelings, right?
No.
So, over the years, I've learned a lot about this story. Like there's an interesting phenomenon where I think they've done some research about traumatic events and the amount of time a person has to anticipate the impact of the traumatic event. And so the incidence of PTSD is greater in people who have a longer period of time to anticipate the impact of an event. For example, if you are T-boned in your car unexpectedly, or somebody hits you from behind and you didn't see it, and that causes a traumatic injury, you're much less likely to develop post-traumatic stress disorder in the wake of that event.
Okay.
In comparison to, like, if you drive your car off of a cliff and for 3 or 4 seconds, your brain is processing the anticipated inevitable traumatic event that's about to happen to you, you go into interesting mental states. Like your brain dissociates, and you do all these weird compartmentalization of traumatic things, which it just doesn't happen as much when it happens suddenly or unexpectedly to you.
Do you have wanderlust? Do you enjoy long road trips with the fam? Do you ever get sick of stopping every 100 miles for your next snack? Do you ever crave something cool and refreshing on a hot day while enjoying a drive? Look no further than the Turn and Churn. The Turn and Churn is a state-of-the-art exterior ice cream maker powered by your vehicle. Simply attach the Turn and Churn to the exterior of your car, set your cruise control to delicious, and it will make fresh ice cream as you drive, powered entirely by the movement of your front wheel. No more frantic ice cream runs. You now simply need to go for a drive. Now available for a limited time with an optional butter attachment. Your car can service all your on-the-road dairy needs. For a limited time, we are offering a special value of buy one, get a second one 25% off. Simply visit Turn and Churn with promo code SPRINKLES. I think where we were picking up was when you have a longer time to process the anticipated or the inevitable traumatic event, your brain does things.
Yeah. And, I'm not a scientist or anything, but I read this in a scientific article through the National Institute of Health. You can read about it if you look up paratraumatic dissociation. This is basically the phenomenon I'm talking about. And people who experience trauma probably know this experience just as well as I do. But again, I feel okay sharing my experience because I made the decision to cross the railroad tracks. It was my fault in a sense. And I realize even within the last year, one of the things I realized about this story is that I carry a lot of guilt about this and, the impact of my potential death that it could have had on my family and my community, and just having gratitude for the train operator as well, who certainly thought they killed me, and like had certainly probably a good 15 minutes of their life where they had felt certain dread. That for me has just been a recent discovery. The thing about stories I love is that you just constantly realize new things about them. This is one of the things, to your listeners, Janelle and I both took this course in college called The Art of Storytelling. And this story about the train has been recorded before in Iowa City at the Java House. They used to record events, public performances of different things. And for years and years, random strangers would come up to me in Iowa City and tell me, "Hey, I heard your story about the train on UITV." Go ahead.
Well, I felt like as we were talking on the phone about kind of the outline for this interview, I feel like you touched on a little bit about like the role of gratitude in your healing journey. Is there something you wanted to speak to on that?
What made me get there is, I'm currently a public school teacher. I teach high school art and multilingual learners. One of the things I had been teaching in the middle of a pandemic and really wanted to engage students in a sort of reflective process about like trying to bring some light or good out of whatever is going on. And I think a good way to process trauma might be just to give gratitude to people who maybe helped you along the way to process that trauma. And I had never thought about the guilt that I felt. And when I thought about giving gratitude to this person, I tried to reach out to the Union Pacific Railroad and see if they could tell me more, because I'm sure they keep documentation about incidences such as these, right? I would almost be certain that they would have some documentation of who it was, but I don't know whether or not they would actually tell me who it was, you know what I mean? Or have contact with that person still, because this was like 1993 or 1994 in Iowa. This is like 30 years ago almost now. So like, I don't know if that person is even alive yet to give gratitude to.
Yeah.
Which kind of, I don't know, is bittersweet.
Sure.
I've been dealing with death also recently. I lost a friend who I played music with very closely and was a fellow drummer. And I guess I'm still learning how to deal with death, honestly. It's a constant process, right?
I feel like I want to make a comment on gratitude. So without sounding like hippie woo woo, I definitely feel like through like my studies of meditation and like levels of consciousness, that being in a state of gratitude, like being occupying that space of being grateful, just elevates your level of consciousness to a really healthy place. And I just feel like as a daily practice, as like a muscle exercise, it is so profound. It's accessible at any moment to be grateful, even just like, for your breath or that you have food right now. I mean, it could be something really simple.
That's definitely true, especially in these times where I've felt kind of hopeless. I know other people do. And when somebody gives you gratitude, it changes things, right? It
Yeah.
makes you feel a lot
And
different about your situation.
I also kind of want to comment, like, I remember I did a lot of work through a book called The Courage to Heal, which was for women survivors of sexual abuse. And one of the things they say is like, be grateful in your healing journey, be grateful, honor what you had to do to survive. And it's kind of bizarre because,
Yeah.
when people have trauma, they act out in all sorts of hurtful ways. And this book says, don't come down on yourself, just honor what you had to do to survive. What you
Yeah.
were talking about like the brain compartmentalizing and doing all sorts of disassociation and compartmentalizing right before your trauma, even though there's so much unpacking and healing that has to be done, your brain is trying to protect you so you
Yeah.
can survive.
Yeah, that's something that humans can't control, by the way. That's built into
Yeah.
our like the way our brains work. That's how we process those things.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we would be, because we're so emotional, right? We're such emotional creatures.
We wouldn't be able to
How do
function.
you
We are
how
always
do you
in that.
function when you're processing events far more terrifying than I went through, right? Like there's a lot worse that people go through for sure. And even my innocuous sort of event caused trauma for me,
Yeah. And I
caused me
feel,
to have PTSD for years. And I had panic attacks and I had dissociative episodes where I felt, I didn't know how to describe it until I was an adult, but like I would dissociate from my reality. Like I felt like I was literally like a fly in the back of my head watching my life unfold around me, but having no desire or interest to interact with the world around me and just kind of flowing with it.
yeah. As someone who, like, for me, who I'm in pursuing mental health counseling, like I'm taking a break from grad school, but that's what I'm pursuing. And I haven't really shared this with our listeners, but I have a mental illness. I have bipolar disorder, and I've definitely like exited reality and gone to psychotic alter realities. But initially that started happening as a response to trauma.
Exactly.
And I
Yes.
think, like people, all the stigma around mental illness, like, Cody, what even you said, like, my trauma is not the worst people have experienced, but trauma is trauma. And in a way, what I'm learning is just everybody's carrying some kind of trauma. And I just really want to see our world move into a place where we create safe space to work through it. And I just, again, want to really thank you for sharing your story and being so vulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely. I love sharing this story. I share it with my students actually all the time because, it's great story for, or fodder for stories, and stories are great. I mean,
Yeah.
when you're teaching um, but I have images that I've created around it, and that's helped me process it too, like creating art. Even just the act of telling the story, it becomes an art form.
Mm-hmm.
This is not the way that I've told the story anytime before this.
Yeah.
Because I had never thought actually about the adjacent story of Tyler Hibbs and how, I mean, it's sort of related in a lot of ways, even though mine wasn't related to work. I mean, the agrarian aspect of our community was a product of the railroad.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's adjacent. That's
The
an
grain
adjacent.
elevator was on the railroad line.
Yeah,
And now,
exactly. I mean, they used to load livestock onto the railroad tracks in that area. I mean, I started around that time working mowing lawns, not just at the library, but all over the community. And I would think about Tyler Hibbs and be like,
Wow.
well, am I going to roll over? Also, just part of, an accepted casualty in a certain way for the agrarian way of life. But, the way you were talking, in your last episode, Debbie was telling about how her mom used to detassel with her crew. And I thought that was fun because, my mom also did that. We did some roguing, which
Mm-hmm.
is similar to detasseling with our mom. Like
Oh, wow.
she got hired and then we would go out with her and help her do the work and earn money with her. So, it was in every aspect of our lives, even if we weren't somebody who lived on a farm. That was part of our community.
Yeah. And like we were very aware of the state of the crops and the weather and how they were doing. I definitely remember that. Like I remember like we would like get a sense of security and safety if the corn was doing really well. Am I the only one who felt that way?
No, absolutely. They would, if there was a big storm that damaged crops, people would be in a bad mood.
Only since talking to you have I really realized how imprinted our agricultural community is like on my psyche. And, even when I moved away to the commune, I carried so much Iowa pride with me. My best friend nicknamed me Corn. Like she just called me Corn.
Yeah, that's so funny.
I know.
Absolutely. I think even not just Iowa, but like in general around the United States, like even here in Washington, where I'm at now, we still have sort of an agrarian calendar that we go by with the school system. They have time off in the summer so that people can work in the summer. And
Yeah.
there are a lot of agrarian communities in this area. It's actually not too dissimilar from rural Iowa on the county here.
Once again, I just want to say thank you, Brock, for sharing your story and being a part of this podcast. As we're wrapping up this episode, I just want to throw out Brock is a very, very talented artist and musician, but he's an artist and
well, so are you. Let's be honest. Let's be real here. We've made music together for a long time. We were in high school band together.
We were in college marching band, kind of
college
together.
Marching band.
Yeah.
We were in the same college marching band, not at the same time. But
yes, that's true.
But
I always feel like I'm not allowed to call myself an artist because like my mom and Sandra, they got to be artists, but I didn't get to be.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of realizing that's a thing. That's a sort of family dynamic thing because my sister also, she's actually a great artist, and she, shout out to my sister Dree, but she, for real, just because I'm an artist and our mom is an artist, like I think she kind of precluded that she could not be an artist herself because she had other qualities, and that's just simply not true. I think art is part of being a human being, and that's what I tell my students too, because so I get a lot of people who are really averse to the idea that they could potentially be an artist, and I just think that's so unfortunate, and I want to change that perspective.
Well, thank you for your encouragement, both to me personally and to all that you're doing for your students.
To be honest, this podcast in a way is a sort of art form, right? Because you have to create it. You have to.
I'd say it's definitely a creative outlet. I don't know if I would call it art, only because how I've defined art, I feel like it's doing something new. It's doing something that like elevates society. It's like, to me, art has these huge implications for what it's doing and the commentary. And I'm just like making fun of myself. That's how I see.
I don't hear anybody else telling the Tyler Hibbs story in 2020.
That's true, but that's true.
You're elevating something.
Yeah. So I want to thank you to our listeners for kind of taking a risk and listening to kind of a different slant on this podcast. And again, thank you to Brock Munch.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. And hopefully I will hear from you soon. Maybe we'll collaborate again in the future anytime.
I'd love to.
All right.